Thank you very much, Jeff, for that quite touching introduction and the very moving little biopic. It's the most curious experience to sit there. Let me turn the tables pretty much straight away after such wonderful thanks. For me to thank my cast and crew. It's always those two words. I really think it should be just the crew, because whether you're in front of the camera or behind, we're all in the same team. I've been reading, recently sort of drawn back to reading about explorers and people sort of taking great journeys. And always interested in the Shackleton story there, where there were ships crushed in the ice of the Antarctic and the crew's stranded. And Shackleton goes off in a little boat to bring back a rescue ship. And I think, making these films, I like analogies a lot. And I do think it is like a kind of journey. And that you are putting a crew together. And they're going to be under stress at certain times. Not just physical, but emotional stress, as Jeff described, that strange moment where he just lost it. Which every major actor I have had, including Harris, had lost it at some point. Because I think the atmosphere can get so strong, the emotion, and so much is demanded of the central character that they're liable to sort of just say, I've had enough. So I'm very understanding. I even wait for it. But it's only momentary, it's only a passing thing. But back to sort of putting your crew together. I mean, one, you want talent. You want people who know the job. Then you also want people who can handle a tough and tight corner, a difficult situation. That will come up. You want to be able to trust them. So in a funny kind of way, I don't cast people in the grips department, but the department heads know, way back to Australia, that I'm very interested in the people they're putting together in their department. And back in the early days with smaller crews, I got so sort of sensitive to it that I could say to Russell Boyd, my cameraman, I'd say, about, one of his gaffer or something, what's the matter with Banzer today? I could feel he wasn't with us, and he was being grumpy. And he said, he's got a family problem. I said, can you have a little chat with him? Let's get him back with us. Because I think a group of people doing something does create a kind of energy. It goes around, and so I love that. And my crew always knew that it was not about my ego or their ego. It was about the film's ego. The film has an ego, and we're there to serve it the best we can. So some of my good friends and good crew and cast are here tonight. So lovely to shake your hands again and to thank you. It makes me think of those important people I've worked with who are not with us, no longer with us. I think of Duncan Henderson, who was my unit production manager. We worked together firstly on Dead Poets, and he went through to Master and Commander and The Way Back, and many other films. But that particularly complex film with its ships and its battles, Duncan carried the weight of that picture across his broad back. And then I think of Norman Lloyd, who played the headmaster in Dead Poets Society, passed away recently, 106, I believe. I stayed in touch with him after the picture and got to know him, sit at his feet, literally, because he was like a walking film history. He had worked with Orson Welles and his great friendship with Hitch as an actor firstly, then in Hitchcock's Hour as co-producer. Lunch on Sundays with Jean Renoir. He knew everybody. And he wasn't a bore. A very unusual thing about someone who can tell a story. He doesn't say, have I told you this before? And he'd ask me questions, what are you doing? And so it was a friendship. He even sent me a script that he thought I might be interested in, something he'd had. It said it was passed around at the Algonquin Club. He sent me the script. He was 100. And said, oh, I think we could do this together, Peter, let's... And Robin Williams, dear Robin. If I could just have him back here just for 5 minutes, that he could be here, and I would say to him, Robin, I've got something. Could you do something on being an intimacy supervisor or coordinator? It was amazing to watch him when there wasn't a crowd around, just 2 or 3 people, when he would be seized by this inspiration and become this sort of extraordinary character. One night, very tired, Sunday night, in the school hall where we filmed Dead Poets, waiting for the boys, the real students, to come in. We promised Robin and I would give them a little chat and thank them. But Sunday nights, as you all know, working in the business, when you're on a shoot, it's pretty precious. You're getting ready for the next day. Anyway, we're behind the curtain, literally, and I'd look out every now and again. No one's there. I said to Robin, do you really think you can do this? You know, he said, oh, yeah. And there was a piano, and on top of the piano was a Bible. And I said, why don't you just read something from the Bible? You know, I mean, save your energy. And he said, a missing chapter of the Bible. And they did roll off in the dirt and cover themselves with dust. And off he went on a complete sort of King James version of the Bible. It was remarkable. Briefly, my own story falls into 2 parts. A filmmaker in Australia for the first half, bunch of films, and secondly here in the United States. I was fortunate to be around when our moribund film industry came to life again in the late 1960s, early 70s. We knew nothing, but we were determined. What we did know was about our love for movies. We had no older generation that you could sit at the feet of and ask them what it's like and what do you do. But we did have film festivals, and we saw the best of world cinema. And so much was happening here. You know, we'd get new John Cassavetes films, and you know, coming from Europe and from Asia. There were still giants roaming the earth at that time, like Kurosawa, monsters. So they were inspiring. And then you had a 16mm camera, you had Bolex, and you had a piece of paper, you could have a pen, you could write your script, and get out there and shoot it. Actors, younger people were quite good. The older people were very difficult to work with because they were theatre trained. So on my first feature, I had a couple of these older gentlemen. And they might have a line like, why don't you come in and sit down? You know, this is the line. So I said, let's rehearse it. Why don't you come in and sit down? You know, I'd say, okay, fine. Why don't we drop the line, and why don't you just point at the chair? To which dear old Eddie Howell said, there goes another line. So in a strange way, that earlier films were silent for the very reason I was cutting out dialogue. Also, we couldn't really write very well. I mean, we were flying there with with very little experience. But what a way to learn. There was no film schools. There was no one to tell you were wrong. There was no one to tell you what a dumb idea. It was just go, let's do it. So I was there with a bunch of what became friends. Some names you would know became very, very well known throughout the world. And that was my life through the 70s, up into the early 80s. Baz Luhrmann was coming along. He's here tonight. And I felt restless. I felt like I needed new inspiration, new energy, new landscapes, different ideas. I was ready for change. I was ready for Hollywood. So over it came. I'd read all the books. I knew I had to be very careful. If things went wrong, then that possibility would be cancelled out. I wouldn't do a second time, wouldn't have a second go. I'd go back and work in Australia. So my agent, John Patag, who was my agent for all of these Hollywood pictures, John's here tonight, and I want to thank him. He guided me. He said, it's Casey. He said, he understood that I'd been, in a way, running wild and free in Australia with the independent films. And he knew that he had to get the right people that would match up with me and would understand how I worked, and I could work with them. And he introduced me to Jeff Katzenberg. And Jeff, what a great meeting. Jeff offered me Witness, and I went up and saw Harrison. We chatted away, and It was wonderful. He met me at the airport, which was quite a surprise. I was thinking I'd get a cab or something. He was up in the mountains. There he was. He was a pickup truck. I said, yeah, that's very decent of him. He was a world-famous guy, you know. So we went to the supermarket to get some supplies, going down the aisle, and there was his face on the drawing on the box of the sort of cornflakes or something, you know, just Han Solo, you know. Anyway, we had a couple of great days. I came back to Jeff Katzenberg and we shook hands on it. And if that picture had gone slightly differently, for example, about working with Jeff, the end sort of penultimate scene was that Harrison was leaving the farm. Either she had to go with him or he had to stay. They had to part. And I'd hinted at Alexander Goodenough, who was, as Amishman would be, her love interest. There were 2 pages of dialogue, not the same kind of situation as I had in Australia, but I cut the 2 pages out, just pulled them out of the script, and I said, it's got to just be done with looks, because if the audience doesn't understand the thing by now, then they never will. You can't stay, she can't go. And dear Ed Feldman, the producer, said, Peter, you signed off on this script. You can't do this in this country, in this studio with the Paramount. You have to film it. And I said, no, I can't. It's not right. It doesn't work. He called Jeff Katzenberg. Jeff, to his credit, came in to see me. We went to dinner. And he said, Peter, you don't want to shoot. Why don't you shoot it and then don't use it if you don't like it? And I said, well, what kind of director is that? We go this way, you know. I mean, you have to have, this is what will work. And he reminded me that when we first met, I'd told him the story. I quite like to do that sometimes. I like the verbal side of it, so I'll tell the story like an after-dinner speaker, not a pitch, about 8-9 minutes. And with all the visuals, you know, as many as I know. You know, so witness, I told him, I said, we open with a sort of field of wheat blowing and bowing and figures coming up through it with black hats and strange fancy, is it fancy dress? Is it a period film? Down the road they go, etc. He said, remember you told me the story like that? Why don't you describe the missing 2 pages to me now? How will it feel? And I said, okay, I'll back up a bit. And so there in the restaurant, you know, I backed up to a couple of scenes and I said, he turns, he looks, he comes through the thing, you know, this happens, that. She looks down, she's worried. She half smiles. He picks that up with that Harrison smile, blah, blah, blah. And he said, sounds good. Yeah, go ahead. And when we did Dead Poets Society, he said, before we started anything, he said, come to dinner tonight. And before dinner, tell me the story. And so I went to his house, you know, and they got up, his glass of wine. Wow, it's the first day of school, etc. So I got off to a good start and had a wonderful 20 years of making studio pictures. I love the history of it all. I talked about through Norman. I was delighted to be here. You've got such a great industry, such a short history. I was thinking, talking pictures aren't 100 years old. I know we're going through tremendous changes. You've done so much. You've produced such wonderful films and such wonderful people. And you're so welcoming to foreigners like me. Never a word about, there was a little joke earlier about taking jobs. Well, you know, that may be true or not, but, well, I don't think it's true. There's too few of us. Anyway, so I would just finally like to say to the Board of Governors, it's a sound I like very much. It has a sort of medieval tang to it. You could have long robes with tassels and sort of funny hats. In England, you would. But you're elected. You're all elected. You all represent one of the branches that make up this industry. And I love craft. I think that's what it's really all about. The art side of it, leave it out. Don't you love something that's well made? Whether it's a chair or a table or a statue. So to all of you, thanks for adding my name to this illustrious roll call of former honorees. Good night. Thank you.